The Great Train Robbery 1963, one of the famous incident. Watch till the end. The air was thick with anticipation as Bruce Reynolds glanced around the dimly lit farmhouse in Leatherslade, Buckinghamshire. His team of 15 men, each handpicked for their specific skills, sat around a large table, listening intently to the final details of the plan. The Great Train Robbery was the culmination of months of meticulous planning, and every man in the room knew that this was their shot at a fortune beyond their wildest dreams. There was no room for error. Reynolds, a mastermind known for his sharp intelligence and meticulous nature, had left nothing to chance. The target was the Royal Mail train traveling from Glasgow to London, a regular run that, on this particular night, was carrying a staggering £2.6 million in used banknotes. Reynolds had secured inside information, learning exactly when and where the money would be, and had spent countless hours planning how they would stop the train, secure the cash, and escape without a trace. The plan was as daring as it was brilliant. On the night of August 8, 1963, the gang set out in the cover of darkness. They drove to a spot near Breda Railway Bridge, where the train would pass in the early hours of the morning. As they arrived, the men moved with military precision, each knowing their role down to the last detail. Two of the robbers, armed with tools, climbed a signal gantry and tampered with the railway signals. They changed the green light to red, forcing the train to stop. The other men took their positions along the track, hearts pounding in their chests as they awaited the train's arrival. It wasn't long before the faint rumble of the approaching locomotive could be heard, growing louder with each passing second. When the train finally came into view, the gang braced themselves. The red signal worked as planned, and the train came to a halt. The gang swarmed the locomotive, and Reynolds, leading the charge, quickly overpowered the driver. Jack Mills, a veteran railwayman, was taken by surprise and tried to resist, but he was struck on the head with a metal bar and incapacitated. The gang knew they had to act quickly. Every second counted. With the driver subdued, the robbers uncoupled the engine and the first two carriages, which contained the money, from the rest of the train. They then forced the second driver to move the detached carriages to a predetermined spot about a half-mile down the track. Here, the rest of the gang waited with their vehicles, ready to load the cash. The heist was now in full swing. The gang entered the carriages and, with practiced efficiency, began unloading the sacks of money. Despite the enormous weight of the cash, the robbers worked quickly, driven by the adrenaline coursing through their veins. Within minutes, they had transferred all the money into their waiting trucks. As the gang sped away from the scene, the gravity of what they had just accomplished began to sink in. They had successfully stolen £2.6 million in used banknotes, a haul worth over £58 million in today's money. The sheer scale of the robbery was unprecedented, and they knew it would go down in history. But as they made their way back to the farmhouse, they also knew that their work was far from over. Now, they had to disappear. Back at Leatherslade Farm, the gang celebrated their success with a mix of jubilation and nervous energy. The farmhouse, chosen for its remote location, was to be their hideout for the next few days. They divided the loot, each man receiving his share of the fortune, but the euphoria was tempered by the knowledge that the police would be hot on their trail. They had left nothing to chance during the robbery, but Reynolds knew that their safety depended on their ability to keep their heads and avoid any mistakes. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. Despite their best efforts, the gang's downfall began with a single error. The police, conducting one of the largest manhunts in British history, eventually traced the robbers to Leatherslade Farm. The discovery of the hideout came after authorities received an anonymous tip-off, and when they arrived, they found crucial evidence that would lead to the capture of most of the gang members. Fingerprints left on a Monopoly board game, used by the robbers to pass the time while hiding out, were among the key pieces of evidence that linked the men to the crime. One by one, the gang members were arrested, and the police began to piece together the full extent of the operation. The trials that followed captivated the nation. The robbers, who had pulled off what was then the crime of the century, were handed down harsh sentences. Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind, was eventually caught in 1968 after 5 years on the run and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Others, like Ronnie Biggs, managed to escape justice for a time. Biggs famously fled to Brazil, living as a fugitive for decades before finally returning to the UK in 2001, where he was imprisoned until his release on compassionate grounds in 2009. The Great Train Robbery of 1963 became a legend, its story riddled in books, films, and documentaries. The audacity of the heist, the meticulous planning, and the dramatic manhunt that followed all contributed to its lasting place in popular culture. For those who were involved, it was a mix of fortune and ruin, as the riches they sought ultimately led to their capture and imprisonment. But for a brief moment in history, These men had achieved the impossible. They had taken on the system and won, at least for a time, and in the quiet English countryside, the echoes of that fateful night in 1963 still linger, a testament to one of the most audacious crimes ever committed. Don't forget to subscribe.